History of Africa, a tapestry of cultural and political change. Introduction. The history of Africa is both vast and diverse, encompassing multiple regions, peoples, and historical epochs. As the world's second-largest continent, Africa is home to over 1 billion people with many diverse cultures, histories, and languages. The history of Africa is not a single, unified narrative, rather, it is a rich and complex tapestry of overlapping stories that span more than 5,000 years. From the ancient civilizations of Egypt, Nubia, and Aksum, to the empires of West and East Africa, to the modern struggles for independence, Africa's history is both colorful and filled with nuance. This historical essay will explore important themes in African history, including the political formation of ancient kingdoms and empires, the spread of Islam and Christianity, and the continent's interactions with Europe and the Americas. We will also discuss how the Atlantic slave trade and European colonialism, both inflicted tremendous suffering and disrupted long-standing traditions and practices, and, in unprecedented ways, shaped the fabric of modern Africa. Ancient African civilizations. Though historians have worked tirelessly to uncover the early history of Africa, much of this prehistoric era remains unknown. Nevertheless, it is widely accepted that the development of agriculture in the region now encompassing modern-day Sudan, Nigeria, and Chad greatly aided in the establishment of notable ancient civilizations. First and foremost, the ancient Egyptian civilization flourished between 3000 BCE and 30 BCE. Known for their advanced agricultural systems, elaborate religious practices, and magnificent pyramids. Egypt was also the first African state to establish a centralized monarchy, which ruled over a highly sophisticated and literate population. In addition to having lasting cultural impacts, these innovations propelled Egypt to wield great power and make significant contributions to the ancient world. Similarly, the Nubian kingdom of Kush, 2500 BCE, 300 CE, and the Aksum Empire, 100 CE, 960 CE, played key roles in African politics and trade. Both powerful monarchies, Kush provided the foundation for later African states, while Aksum played a critical role in the rise of Christianity in Africa. For instance, Saint Frumentius, the first bishop of Aksum, had a profound influence on the religious traditions in Ethiopia, which endures to this day. West and East African empires and the spread of Islam. From the 7th to the 15th centuries, a variety of powerful empires arose in West Africa, notably those of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. The Empire of Ghana, 6th to 13th centuries, commenced as a trading center for gold and salt, growing to establish its capital, Kumbi-Sala, at the threshold of varying trade routes. Celebrated as a center of Islamic scholarship and culture, the Empire of Mali, 1230 to 1600 CE, cultivated the famous West African city of Timbuktu. Djinguereber, Sidi Yehya, and Sankor were three grand mosques built during the Mali Empire, which later became essential centers of learning. The subsequent empire to arise in the region, that of Songhai, 15th to 16th centuries, was founded on the power base of Gao, continuing to generate impactful centers of commerce and learning throughout its reign. East Africa, on the other hand, saw the rise of the Swahili coast, 1000 to 1500 CE, so-called due to the Swahili language spoken by the inhabitants. This cosmopolitan region comprised a network of city-states, such as Mombasa, Kilwa, and Zanzibar, that were governed by local kings or sultans. The Swahili coast was involved in the Indian Ocean trade network, which facilitated the exchange of gold, ivory, and slaves for luxury goods like glassware and textiles. Additionally, the Swahili coast played a pivotal role in the spread of Islam across East and Central Africa. The impact of Europe and the Americas. Africa's engagement with the rest of the world witnessed a significant shift with the arrival of Europeans and the inception of the Atlantic slave trade. The Portuguese initiated the European exploration of Africa in the 15th century, prompting heightened competition among European nations to capitalize on Africa's resources. This exploitation eventually culminated in the Berlin Conference of 1884–85, during which European powers partitioned Africa among themselves, disregarding Africa's cultural distinctions and promoting ethnic rivalries. The institution of the transatlantic slave trade undoubtedly represents one of the most devastating outcomes of such contact. Lasting from the 16th to the 19th centuries, this trade resulted in the enslavement and forced deportation of millions of Africans to North and South America, cutting deep wounds into the African continent. The demographic implications of the slave trade were profound, as the population of Africa stagnated or decreased, further hampered by European colonizers' introduction of new diseases. Additionally, the loss of multiple generations of skilled and valuable warriors, cultivators, and artisans severely hindered many African societies' progress and development. From colonization to independence. By the early 20th century, European imperialism resulted in Africa's almost complete colonization, with Liberia and Ethiopia remaining the only independent African nations. Colonial rule brought significant shifts in Africa's political, economic, and social structures, introducing capitalism and Western political ideals while reinforcing unequal power relationships. Often, the systems of governance imposed by the colonizing powers facilitated the exploitation of resources and favored specific ethnic groups. Nonetheless, the 20th century also marked the emergence of various resistance movements and the recovery of African agency against European imperialism. With the rise of Pan-Africanism, which encouraged unity and solidarity amongst people of African descent, independence movements began to garner steam. Following World War II, indigenous leaders across Africa seized the opportunity presented by weakened European empires and began movements pushing for self-determination and nationalism. Starting with Ghana's independence in 1957, most nations of Africa underwent a series of battles, often bloody, to reclaim their sovereignty eventually. Conclusion. Africa's history is a rich tapestry of diverse cultures, religions, and empires that have played indispensable roles in the formation of the modern world. The spread of Islam and Christianity through African empires, the pivotal position of African societies in global trade networks, and the profound impact of the transatlantic slave trade and European colonization, have all contributed to the continent's complex historical narrative. In recent times, African nations have struggled with the ongoing challenges of post-colonial state-building and economic development, legacies of imperialism, and the growing influence of international power dynamics. Though it is crucial to recognize the immense suffering inflicted upon Africa through colonization and the slave trade, the history of Africa must not be reduced solely to accounts of oppression and victimization. By shedding light on the continent's pre-colonial civilizations, thriving empires, and the vast wealth of diverse cultural traditions, one becomes privy to the story of an Africa far richer than meets the eye. As African nations continue to forge their paths in the 21st century, it remains essential to engage with their diverse historical journeys to better understand the present and envision a